Welcome back. In this episode, we explore the traditional cuisine of our ancestors and focus on a few dishes that some of us continue to make and enjoy. Like religion and language, traditional cuisine defines a culture. And because our ancestors were influenced by many different cultures, our cuisine includes Bavarian, Austrian, Czech, Polish, Ukrainian, and Hungarian ingredients. Our elders always referred to us as Austrian, so I, for one, assumed that pierogies, cabbage rolls, and schäutle were Austrian dishes. Having visited Austria several times, I can attest that none of these items appear in any Austrian menu that I've seen. However, its famous Wiener Schnitzel, or Viennese cutlet, can be found in all corners of the former Habsburg Empire. Before we explore these dishes in more depth, let's trek back to old German Bohemia, where our ancestors lived for more than 200 years, to see if the Czech meals influenced our own. This is the village of Hostka, formerly Hesselsdorf, where our Lang family had its origins. And a few kilometers from here we found a little restaurant. On the menu, schnitzel with wild mushroom sauce, Jägerschnitzel in German, or hunter's cutlet, and venison in mushroom gravy with a raised dumpling. The flavors were familiar indeed, as they were in Prague taverns and restaurants, serving all manner of cured and smoked pork. And in all cases, the beverage of choice was beer. After all, Pilsner beer was invented in Pilsen, about 50 kilometers away. Pilsen, Pilsener, you got it. As the ancestors trekked farther east, more items found their way to the dinner table. For example, our meals in pre-war Lviv included potato pancakes, pierogies, poppy seed desserts, rolled crepes, and baked Alaska? Who knew? In our family's ancestral village of Felicienthal, today called Dolanivka, we were treated to a noon meal by the hospitable Dankevich family. There we were reminded of a key feature of ancestral cuisine. It was locally sourced. Not from the nearest city or town, but from the backyard. Milk from Mrs. Dankevich's cows made this butter and sour cream. The potato filling in the pierogies and the onions are from the garden, eggs from the chickens. So, with few exceptions, what you see here came from here. Except maybe the schnapps. In short, had we wandered into our relative's home in 1860 Felicienthal, we may well have eaten the same foods. And even the flour would have been ground from the local grain at my great-grandfather Ferdinand's Felicienthal mill. Back then, if there had been meat, it likely would have been wild game, because Felicienthal, like Hesselsdorf, was then surrounded by forests. It's clear that game was a big part of the diet there, as it was in the homesteading days in the Canadian West, by the way. You might recall seeing the mounted antlers at Max Lang's home in Raymore, for example. Max was a dedicated hunter for most of his life. As for fish, there was the mysterious tradition of carp at Christmas, which was pulled from carp ponds found in many villages, like here in Hesselsdorf. In a nutshell, the ingredients of the traditional meals of our parents and grandparents were sourced locally and adapted from similar dishes across many cultures, and each had its own name. For example, pierogi, vareniki, they all mean pierogies. So let's start with the pierogi. Again, different cultures had slightly different recipes, but in the end, a pierogi is dough wrapped around a filling and boiled. Full disclosure, I am the cook in our household, and I make many of the traditional dishes. Like others in my family, it was clear early on that if I wanted to eat the foods of my youth, I was going to have to make them myself. Here, I'm making pierogies with old friends in Prague. I employ a few simple guidelines passed to me by my sister Lorraine. Oil and mashed potato make dough soft, eggs make it tough. So I add mashed potatoes into the dough using flour, 1 egg yolk, a tablespoon or 2 of oil, and buttermilk. I roll it out, cut it into rounds and fill it with cooked, chopped sauerkraut. More on that later. Or dry curd cottage cheese with green onion or mushrooms, or for the many who prefer it, like granddaughter Emily, mashed potato and cheese. Fill them up, boil them up, and then saute them in just a little bit of butter and breadcrumbs. Serve with caramelized onions and sour cream. The cabbage roll, Krautwickel Golumpi Hulupchi. Virtually all Christmas and major gatherings of our clans involved cabbage rolls, which are simply rice and meat wrapped in a cabbage leaf and cooked. But sour or sweet cabbage leaf, ground beef or pork or ham or bacon plus rice in the filling. Simmered in water or tomato sauce. Of course, there are no wrong answers. These are Claudia Labatt's cabbage rolls, enough for a big family. She's the daughter of Gabe Lang, no relation, and Zita Lang, mentioned earlier, who is the daughter of Max and Teresa. Zita, like many of the women in our community, was an excellent cook, and it seems Claudia has taken up where Zita left off. In her case, as in our house, sour cabbage leaves were preferred. Sauerkraut, kapusta, brined cabbage in English. Sour cabbage leaves come from sour cabbage heads, which involves putting them into the same brine as the sauerkraut, which is a dead simple recipe involving water and salt. For sauerkraut, you shred the cabbage using a cabbage cutter like this one, and put it in the brine for a few weeks, depending on the temperature. Hats off to Claudia and her sisters for keeping these skills alive. For the less adventurous, like yours truly, good kraut is available commercially. I like Kuna, made only with water and salt. It's tasty raw and good for your gut, we're told, but mostly we eat it cooked. In my case, I simmer it in chopped onions and bacon with a sprinkling of caraway seeds, which apparently marks it as Bavarian. For more liquid, beer works well. Sauerkraut is often served with cured smoked pork, such as chops or sausage. Sausage, kielbasa, kofbasa, Wurst. Middle Europeans are famous for sausage, although virtually every culture makes one form or another. Here I'll quickly describe two types. First, smoked pork sausage. 40 years ago, we videotaped some sausage making at my brother Lynn's home.
And when they were cutting up the pork the night before, all the stuff that was going to go into the sausage went into a separate container, and they poured a bit of brine over that meat overnight. And then the next day, they drained the juice off and then ground that pork up. And that's how the tender quick and the cure got into the sausage. So it just sat in the brine overnight, and that was all.
The best we ever made.
No doubt it was the best they ever made. Squeamish viewers may want to skip ahead a minute or so because next up is blood sausage, or Blutwurst, which is not unique to our cultures. The English call it black pudding, the Spanish morcilla, and the French boudin noir. Like smoked sausage, we made this at the farm, and like many of you, we enjoyed it baked till it was crisp. I suspect none of us will ever make it ourselves, but many Polish meat shops carry kiszka. That's right, just like the polka. In case you're still watching, ours was made with some pork blood, neck meat, and other bits of meat mixed with pearl barley and then boiled. It's usually pre-cooked. Okay, squeamish people, you can likely handle the next one. head cheese, salsation, studenetz, presskopf. Surely the worst named dish in our cuisine, well, maybe blood sausage too, but it no longer has anything to do with heads. Feet, yes, but heads, no. It's merely pork in aspic. Take pork hocks, add onion, a few spices, salt and pepper, and simmer until the meat falls off the bones. Discard all but the fatless meat, shred that meat and add the liquid back, then let it set in a cool place overnight. And although some people do, we don't eat it in sandwiches. I've never been able to figure that one out. We eat it in a bowl with vinegar, with a spoon or a fork. And now the inevitable potato pancakes or kartoffelpuffer, plaki zemniaczkane, deruni latkes. Sorry for my pronunciation, folks. Again, you cook with what you have, and everyone has potatoes. The potato pancake is common to many cultures. Easy to make, just shred or grate potatoes, squeeze out as much liquid as you can, add some minced onion, an egg, a little flour, salt, and some buttermilk, and fry them up. Serve with any meat dish, with gravy or with sour cream. Germans usually serve them with applesauce. This was news to me. Borscht, barzic, borscht. Borscht is beet soup, and you either love it or you don't like beets. No judgment, many people don't like beets. In Ukraine, we found borscht to be almost exclusively to include beets, no other vegetables except perhaps onions and dill. However, many people add other vegetables like carrots and peas. You could use any broth, but I prefer beef. Simmer till the beets are tender, add a dash of vinegar, and serve with a dollop of sour cream. As for the dill, it's in a lot of our dishes, not just pickles. In our culture, you've probably noticed that we add it to all kinds of dishes like salads, broths, and sauces. Dill and Middle Europe go together. If you have a garden, don't forget to grow herbs like thyme, dill, rosemary, parsley, chives. They're always fresh and very aromatic. Doch. As far as I know, no one knows how to spell this, and I can find no other names for it in other languages. A teacher at Wallenstein drew laughs when he asked what doch was. We're told that someone who is likely watching this replied, "You don't know what doch is?" Well, this one is easy. Same ingredients as potato pancakes, but baked in a pan. Here I use a cast iron skillet. Serve with mushroom sauce or sour cream or whatever. Note, however, that Zita's recipe, which she gave me, was much simpler. But on this, she and I will differ, as we did on a number of issues, but I digress. In our family, most of the Bohemian Sodbusters' children married non-German speaking spouses, and this expanded the family's cuisine. For example, Zita Lang's husband Gabe was Hungarian, so her family enjoyed stuffed peppers, goulash, and fancy Hungarian pastries. Her daughter Claudia's husband is of French lineage, so their traditional foods include tourtière, a meat pie traditionally made from wild game, but also from pork and other meats. Charlotte Weiler, granddaughter of Max and Teresa, is big on butter tarts. Well, who isn't, eh? And just like that, we're into desserts. With few basic ingredients, our ancestors and their descendants fashioned a myriad of delicate, transcendent desserts, all of which as children we took entirely for granted. For example, apple strudel. This seems to be mostly Austrian Bohemian in origin. In its pure form, for bakers, strudel is not for the faint of heart. It involves making the thinnest imaginable dough, stretched across a table here once again with Zita Lang, and rolled into tubes full of chopped apples. As a child, I recall being under the table and seeing that dough hanging down around me. Today, however, I cheat, and I recommend it. Commercial phyllo pastry works just fine. Mom's recipe, such as it is, involves basting each sheet with butter, sprinkling on sugar and breadcrumbs, then spread the filling, apple, cinnamon, sugar, butter, flour, and a dash of almond extract. Roll it up, bake it up, and dust with icing sugar. To date, I've had no complaints. Schortel or Schortlach. Many of you remember this uniquely Bohemian pastry. It has various names in translation, it seems: angel's wings, pig's ears, and my favorite, torn pants. In short, strips of sweetened egg dough are deep fried in fresh lard, and then sprinkled with icing sugar. They're in the same category as donuts, Auntie Agnes House's specialty. In this photo from 1982, Dad is trying one of her pastries. Plum dumplings, Zwetschgenknödel. I'm sorry, I'm not going to try saying that last one. Again, simple ingredients. I made these plum dumplings using a version of pierogi dough wrapped around a whole plum, boiled, then split, and laced liberally with honey-sweetened white sauce. Pancakes are a style, sometimes called crepes, pfannkuchen, naleśniki. We simply call them pancakes because we had no other kind on our farm. Make as you would French crepes, serve with syrup or filled with cottage cheese, cinnamon, and raisins. Make lots. And it's not Bohemian, but definitely a family tradition, Saskatoon pie. I preferred Zita's version, cooked filling poured into a big pie shell, served with whipped cream. And fruitcake. What would Christmas be without fruitcake? An improvement, some say, but I love fruitcake. I don't make it, but happily others do. The recipes I send will include one from Pat Riddell, formerly Pat Fisher, who grew up, as we did, among all these cooks. That's her mother in this photo. And finally, candies. A final quick mention of candy, most of which was made by my mother in my family. Here, Claudia shows us how she makes fudge to this day. I could go on, but by now you're either very hungry or asleep. In the next episode of Bohemian Sodbusters, we'll take a close look at the first years of homesteading in Saskatchewan. Until then, bon appetit, and thanks for watching.